This episode is sponsored by my online training portal, which is designed by me to help you become a building forensics badass. You can get free access right now at buildingperformanceworkshop.com. Enjoy. Welcome to the Building Performance Podcast from Building Performance Workshop in Chicago. I'm Corbett Lunsford, and we are in the tiny house hotel called Caravan in Portland, Oregon, with Cole Peterson. Cole, thank you very much for talking with us today.
Thanks for having me.
Cole owns this place, and it's his concept, and Ben Kovko, who is the tiny house builder in whose house we are in right now. Ben, thanks very much for talking with us.
Thanks, Corbett.
So, tiny house, we just had a tour here, and you guys do this not just once a month, but once a week. Is that right?
Yeah, so we opened up about a year and a half ago, and we had so many people coming to check out our tiny houses from the gates, and we started letting them in. We were letting them in a lot, but it was actually becoming really disruptive to us being able to turn over our tiny houses, get them clean for guests. So we started to be like, you know what, there's so much interest, let's just start consolidating and streamlining this to a weekly tour. So we started having these tours a few months ago, and they've been really just selling out and very popular, and so now we're doing it every week, and we anticipate actually potentially doing more than once a week, in the summer months.
And what's the psychological draw? Clearly, people are interested in this. Is it like a pretty big cross section of just the American public, or are they all pretty edgy or alternative or something like that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We had assumptions about what kind of demographic would be interested in staying here and checking them out, but those demographics are not true, and those assumptions were not true. And we've had a really wide range of people from all ages, from little kids who love tiny houses because they're so fun and they're built for people their size, they think. And then there's people like today we had a 92-year-old woman. We have a lot of people who are baby boomers. We have a lot of Gen Xers and a lot of millennials, really like a very wide cross-section. There's a lot of people who are interested in not getting entrenched into a mortgage. And so that would be a common denominator is in general, tiny houses, one of the appeals to them is people are interested in being able to buy something and not enter it into getting a 30-year fixed mortgage for it. So that's kind of a dominant theme that you'll see when you talk to people who are interested in tiny houses.
Mm-hmm. Now, Ben, you actually built this place that we're sitting right now. And by the way, it feels very spacious. It's nice. It's pleasant. It doesn't feel like a huge concert hall, but nobody wants to live in a concert hall anyway.
Right.
So what did you go through when you built this place? This was your first one that you had built?
It was the first tiny house I built. I've been thinking about small spaces for a long time before that, and never really desiring to live in a huge house. I first came across a tiny house in 2008 or 2009. I saw some random picture online. I'd already been having these thoughts about straw bale building and mud brick building and building a small dwelling with natural materials. So my mind was sort of thinking small, but I saw this thing on the back of a trailer, and I didn't really know, about tiny houses and the movement and what these things might have meant, but it was just a really cool small house. So that sort of planted the seed for me, and then as fate would have it, I moved to Portland, and here I was in the center of the tiny house universe all of a sudden.
And then you just built this thing. It was so easy.
Right. Just like that. Yeah, no, exactly. Yeah,
so, seriously, when you actually, how exactly did you start building this place? Because it's got a peaked roof. Yeah. It's got beautiful finishes. I mean, it's a very nice house. It happens to be small and portable, but I'm sure that there was a lot of design consideration that went into it up front. Is that correct?
There's a lot of consideration. I'm probably a little slack like that in that, I want to get started. My hands get itchy.
You're a builder, not an architect.
I'm a builder, right? I need to start sticking things together. So I did minimal drawings, basically just wall elevations and the roofing design, using Google SketchUp, to just get the layout right, figure out where the windows were going to go and dimensions so that, you have enough space on the wall for a window and a door, for example, things like that. But really, the rest of it came together on the fly. Like all the interior work was really, really sort of in the moment, to the point where this whole interior was going to be the blue pine material all over. And I mean, it was literally the day we were about to start putting up this material where I had this moment of like, too much, you know, it was just going to be wood everywhere. So we ended up going with this two-tone design where there's a, you know, a painted section and this wainscoting look. So things like that, a lot of that happened, you know, where there were literally decisions being made in the moment. You know, I had some materials I knew I wanted to use, and I just decided how that was going to work. So.
Now, I work on a lot of building sites, and I find that the bigger the building site, like a multifamily building, the more problems and the more repercussions those problems have. But did you build this place with other people, or was it literally a one-person crew?
No, I definitely had help from a couple of key people, and there was a whole bunch of hands at different times who did little bits. But it was mostly me. So if there was a mistake, you know,
or a change, or something in the middle,
right,
it's literally in your head.
Yeah, it was literally like that. And for example, I actually rebuilt, obviously before any of the wall finishes went on, the loft I rebuilt 3 times, I think.
Wow.
Like just tweaking it and, you know, deciding one height was good, and then realizing I maxed it out a little bit too much and I could get a bit more space by dropping it like 3 inches. So things like that. There was definitely there's nothing major where I felt like I had to backtrack, but there's definitely some inefficiency that might have been made up for by having some better design on the front end.
Right.
But
so, Cole, you have 6 of the tiny houses here on this lot in Portland. What is your experience? I'm sure that people pick one over the other because of the way it looks or the way that it feels or something. Is there something that you found in, like, are you refining what you're looking for in a tiny house after having seen a number of them? Or do you find that how different they are is actually a benefit?
Yeah, in our case, we want diversity of tiny houses. There's some core things that we need, like on a really pragmatic level. All of our units are electric. We don't want propane or gas as a form of heating.
Because
just because we're hooked up with 50 amps of electric service for each one. So we want it to be kind of a quick plug-and-play operation. We don't want to worry about flames for guests. We don't want to worry about fire liability. That's really different than most tiny houses that are out there, which would probably want to have propane or gas. We also are the only we have sewer connections, so we want flush toilets, for example. And that's different than most tiny houses where they have composting toilets. So those are 2 things we really need. And then in addition to that, we need to have a queen bed to accommodate guests. And then we need to have, a hangout space, a common space. But beyond that, what we're looking for is kind of the most creative, artistic, well-built, well-designed tiny houses we can find, because we want to serve people who are interested in living in a tiny house but don't know exactly what style. So we want that kind of diversity.
Okay, Ben, you have driven one of these things. You said you drove it 4.5 miles.
One time, yep.
One time, okay. And you said that it was a very pleasant experience, right?
Oh, yes, indeed.
What was it? What was it
Didn't
like?
that sound like what I said? Yeah. There was a couple of issues, you know. First, just setting the trailer up. You know, I'd had this thing for 10.5 months, and we had actually moved it once in the middle of the build. The site where I first started building it became unavailable for whatever reason, partly because the build took twice as long as I originally planned it to, and they needed their space back. So I had to move it. That was nerve-wracking enough, and that was only about 200 yards. It was literally around the corner to a different build site. The move here, we had one big hiccup where we towed it out, and the hitch was not quite. There's an adjustable hitch, so you can change the height, and the wheels were actually rubbing on the guards, which is a bit of a concern. So we had to stop on the side of the road and adjust that, 100 yards down the road from where we started.
Just adjust the foundation of your house,
right,
that's all.
Exactly, right. Yeah, good thing to do, and you've only made it, 100 yards out of the gate. So we'd planned a route here to, take the most open streets we could, and also it was a route that just had big, wide left-hand turns in it. No tight right-hand corners, so it's just terrible. Like driving it down the street and monitoring both mirrors and knowing that you are 8.5 feet plus maybe a tiny bit on the walls. It's, it's just nerve-wracking.
So lanes are 10 feet wide. And are people being interested and courteous and like, what is that? Or are they just like, I gotta get out of my way?
There's definitely a lot of heads turning for sure. Yeah. You can see every person who drives fast. Like, what?
So that would make them more careful, right? They're aware of you at least.
Yeah, except now they're not watching the road. So they're watching you. But yeah, it wasn't a fun experience. And just because this thing is maxing out every dimension of what a trailer can be, height, width, volume, it's about as big as a load you're allowed to tow down the road without a pilot vehicle. So it's not a lot of fun. But you can certainly make, plenty of people have built tiny houses that they know they're going to travel in, and you just wouldn't build it like this exactly.
Yeah.
You make it streamlined and make it a lot more efficient on the road and lighter.
Right.
Of course.
So, Cole, keep Portland weird is like the motto, right? So you parked 6 on a lot, and they let you do that. But in a lot of places, like where I'm from in Chicago, they don't actually allow you to do something like this. So did you have any hurdles, first of all, with the city of Portland?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, they were really great to work with, but it was an unusual idea that we proposed, and it took a lot of conversations with transportation, health department, planning department, zoning department, building department, to figure out what regulatory structure we would fall under. And it just so happened that our lot, being a commercial lot, allowed for a hotel use because we could have a retail, we're in a retail zone. So that means people can stay here for less than 30 nights legally. And it also allowed for us to have a vehicle area, which allows for trailers to be parked on our lot for periods of time. So we managed to somehow abide by all the regulations that were in place, but you couldn't actually live in these permanently. You could only live in them for up to 30 days in our application. So it's a little bit different than a lot of people are interested in living in tiny houses full time and living in tiny house communities, quote unquote. And so what we have visually looks like a tiny house community, but it's actually, it's by virtue of the fact that it's a hotel. It isn't a residential community, and therefore it falls under a totally different kind of regulatory structure than what most people are interested in doing.
So the red tape you had to put up with was basically like a builder going to the building department and all of the hassle and the going back and forth and all that stuff times 3 or 4, because you have also the transportation department is interested because you've got wheels and et cetera. Is that basically, it was like just a headache?
It was a headache to figure out which regulation applied to us. And then once we figured it out, it was quite simple actually, which is cool. So, the buildings themselves are not regulated by the building department because they're on wheels. It was the lot that we needed to have adhere to the various building code regulations in terms of the RV park style infrastructure that we have connected to the tiny houses.
Mm-hmm. So out of curiosity, having a compound of buildings like this, is there anything that's come up with the performance of the buildings, like the way that rain comes off them or anything like that that's kind of surprised you? Like, oh, we didn't think about that now that you've been around for a year and a half through a whole cycle of seasons. Was there anything that surprised you? Yeah,
I'd say 2 surprises are Portland's a pretty temperate climate, but we do have a couple weeks of really hot weather, hot and dry, like in the 90s. And then in the winter, we typically, not this winter, but we typically do experience spells of weather for 4 or 5 days that are below freezing. Both of those situations are ones that we needed to design for. That took a lot of brain power to design for well. So we ended up having to put in AC units in the ones that could accommodate them last summer, which was visually not that great from my perspective, but it was necessary because we're a hotel and people expect to be able to sleep at night in reasonably comfortable spaces.
How dare they? Just people, right? Come on.
And then in the winter, we needed to weatherize. We needed to weather wrap all of our hoses. I insulated them. I bought on Amazon, I bought heated hoses that you plug in so that they turn on and have a heat coil that keeps them above freezing during freezing weather to deal with.
Are we talking about the fresh water intake?
That's right.
Interesting.
Yeah. So we had to deal with that, and then the water boxes themselves needed to be insulated and heated. So we've had to deal with some of this RV. These are the kind of issues that any RV park might have to deal with, and we've of course had to kind of figure that out for this application.
Interesting. Ben, if you were going to be building these for normal people, what are the things that you would make sure that they understand before you start even discussing it with them? Because it seems like there are some things that are profoundly different between the performance of a normal house and the performance of a tiny house.
Yeah, that's interesting. I feel like in Portland, the thing I lean towards more is combating cold. So obviously these things are built with 2x4 walls. All of these houses, not to say you have to do that, but these are all built with 2x4 framing. So that in itself limits the amount of insulation you're going to get in it. This house has R15 bats in the walls, slightly thicker bats in the floor, R23, but only R10 in the ceiling. So it's definitely, on the low side for any new construction. Like that would never meet code. That said, they heat up really easily. It's a small space, so there's this trade-off between you can overcapitalize on that sometimes, and if you're living and I've read some stuff. Jay Schaefer talks a lot about this, how that right sizing the building itself, and also right sizing those components for the environment that you're going to live in. So that's an aspect, is like, I'm going to build it here, but do they intend to tow it up to Alaska and live in it? Or are they going to go to Mexico? So, that might be considerations, and, all aspects, insulation and venting, what sort of windows they want, where are they going to be placed? Because there's a lot to think about.
Have you seen that it's air quality is a thing that obviously people are becoming more cognizant about, especially with like a tiny house that's built really airtight? They're going to have stale air. Is that a concern that you guys have had to deal with at all? Especially because you probably have people whose behavior you can't regulate in these. Like, I'm sure that there are some people who cook some stinky food, or use the bedclothes for 5 days in a row without, showering or something like that. What happens when the air quality starts to get stale? Is the ventilation fan in the bathroom enough to just kind of take care of it?
So Cole could probably speak better to that, because I don't get the feedback from the folks who stay here. But, if it was really going to be lived in and it was someone's home space and they were cooking in it every day, I would absolutely recommend installing a kitchen vent, some sort of range that's going to vent to the outside, because obviously you're generating a lot. And I don't think, if you're really cooking hard and making regular meals in here, I don't think the bathroom, but you would want to rely on venting out of the bathroom. It would definitely start to fill the space up.
And we have vents in all of our bathrooms, and that's really the only area where we need to worry about humidity control and smells. For the most part, people, since we're on this really busy commercial retail street, people are eating out, so they're not so much cooking in. Although some people do come here to try to feel what it's like to live in a tiny house. And we provide basic kitchenware to do that. Every tiny house has a hot plate and a microwave and cookware, so people do occasionally experiment with it, but yeah, it would be different if you had a lot of water boiling in here. You'd probably want to have a vent in the kitchen potentially, but it just hasn't really been an issue for us so far.
So I am hoping that as far as driving a tiny house goes, it gets less and less terrified as you practice it.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if, Cole, you think that now that you have gone through the struggle of starting a business that does this, if you're thinking about the fact that it would be easier in other cities to replicate it. Do you have plans of expanding this?
We get contacted, I'd say if not every day, every week, by people who want to start something like this. But and we're willing to entertain like consultations on that. The reality is a lot of people are, who contact us don't end up pursuing it, because the first thing that we direct them to do is speak with their city about whether or not they have a lot that would allow for this kind of use. And that essentially knocks out most people, because you have to have a lot that would allow for retail use, which is a hotel, and would allow for in this case, like a park, essentially. So it has to allow for both of those uses to be able to accommodate this type of business. But that said, yes, we've paved the path here, and it's possible that other people could potentially do this elsewhere, and I would think that eventually it would happen.
What I hear you saying, though, is that you have the tiny house mentality of wanting to do business tiny, too, and you yourself you don't have dreams of being a magnate of, like, tiny house hotels all over the world.
Oh, yeah. For us, we're more interested in doing really creative, cool things around small housing alternatives here in Portland. So that means running events that are promoting accessory dwelling units, which are secondary housing units on single-family lots. And Deb and I, my wife and I, who own this business, live in one, and I teach a class about those. And that's more of a passion for me. And Ben actually is thinking about building an ADU as well. So tiny houses are 100 to 200 square feet. It's a pretty extreme change for people who are used to living in 921 square feet per capita. But to move into an ADU, which are typically 500 to 800 square feet, is a more palatable, reasonable, potentially luxurious option in terms of the size. And it pencils out really well. It costs more upfront than a tiny house, but in a city that allows it, I don't know if Chicago does, but some cities do on the West Coast in particular, Santa Cruz, Seattle, Portland, Vancouver, British Columbia allow it. When you can build one, if you can figure out a way to finance it, they pay off really well. And so basically, Caravan is here to help people who want to test out living in a tiny house for a night, thinking about building one, but it's also here to educate people about small housing alternatives like ADUs.
Awesome. You guys, thank you so much for talking with us.
Thanks, Colby.
Thank you.
All right. Cole Peterson is the owner of Caravan, the tiny house hotel in Portland. Ben Kovko is a tiny house builder here in Portland. You've been listening to the Building Performance podcast from Building Performance Workshop in Chicago. I'm Corbett Lunsford. Tune in next time.